even the group we know as Filipinos, so they speak Philippine languages, including Tagalog, Ilocano, Kapampangan, and other spoken languages in the Philippines, but also including Filipino Sign Language, which is the language of deaf Filipinos. So language, as I mentioned, is universal in humanity. All humans possess language. Many humans have a spoken language, but there are segments among humans that use a visual language, and there are different visual languages in the world. American Sign Language is different from Filipino Sign Language, it's different from British Sign Language, from Chinese Sign Language, Japanese Sign Language, etc. Now, what is the relationship between language and culture? We believe that there is a dialectical relationship between the two. Language is the soul of a culture. You have a certain affinity to your own culture. You have a certain ethnic identity because you possess a certain language. The differences in language brings about differences in linguistic communities as well as in ethnic communities. We call a certain person as a Tagalog because he or she speaks Tagalog. And we call a certain person as Fukienese, for example, because he or she speaks Fukienese. Among deaf Filipinos, he or she is identified also by the language that he or she uses as his or her mother tongue. Most Filipinos use Filipino Sign Language as their mother tongue and are therefore identified by this linguistic feature. Because different languages are not similar with one another, there are certain terms that one could not capture because a different language group organizes the world differently. A typical example is if you translate pang-ilan ka sa mga magkakapatid, this is difficult to translate in English because English speakers do not give importance to the hierarchy among siblings or within society. They do not count by who is the eldest, who is the youngest, who's the second, who's the third. Because different languages give importance to different things. The American anthropologist Franz Boas called this as the concept of cultural emphasis. When Franz Boas did fieldwork among Eskimos, he asked Eskimos, what is your translation? What is the Eskimo word for snow? And Eskimos had a difficulty because they have a different word for different types of snow. There's a different term for hard snow as opposed to soft snow. There's a different term for transparent versus translucent versus opaque snow. There's a different term for snow that is about to fall and snow that is already on the ground. Of course, we understand this because the Eskimo world revolves around snow. If you don't know which is hard or soft, then you cannot survive that particular culture. You might sink into a soft ice within the environment. If you don't know what is transparent versus opaque, you cannot make windows into an igloo. So, according to Boas, the number of synonyms of a certain concept in a particular language means that that concept is very important to a particular culture. Let us look at the Philippine example. If we translate rice into Tagalog, again, we will have a difficulty. If it is rice that is still growing as a plant, we call it palay. If it is already husked, we call it bigas. If it is being cooked, we call it sinaing. If it is already cooked rice, we call it kanin. If it is cold rice, we call it bahaw. If it is fried rice, we call it sinangag. If it is burnt rice, we call it tutong. So there is not one word of rice in Tagalog. This means Philippine society is based on rice culture. So we could go on and on with examples. Now, one other linguistic relationship between language and culture was identified by Edward Sapir and his student Benjamin Lee Wirth. According to him, they developed this concept of Wirthian hypothesis, that humans do the things they do because of language, because language is organized differently according to different societies. For example, the English language is very racist because in the English language, they distinguish differences among races as well as sexes. For example, he and she, man, woman are distinguished. But in Austronesian languages, such as languages in the Philippines, distinction among sexes is not so important. Again, these are some of the traits that we see in the relationship between language and culture. So, is it possible for a certain group of people not to have culture? Again, that's impossible. All humans have a culture. All Filipinos have a culture known as Philippine culture. But I'm not saying that we have a homogeneous culture, because there are different cultures even within the Philippine setting. Because there are more than 170 languages in the Philippines, there may be more than 170 cultures in the Philippines. And with each culture, there may be subcultures. For example, among Filipino youth, depending on their particular orientation in terms of music styles, sexual preferences, their sociolect, or how they speak as a community, again, this would create different cultures. And this diversity of cultures is something to celebrate. It's not a cause for worry, because this is what makes us human. Life would be very boring if we only have the same language. And we should respect each one's language. We should respect each one's culture.